Okay, we are one TikTok. Yeah, 1:20. We are recording. It is, isn't it? Yeah, it's recording. Okay, so Common Core Standard is going to be, we're going to be looking at complex and imaginary numbers. Okay? Complex and imaginary numbers. Okay? Now, imaginary numbers, that's the easy part. I'm going to do a little work up here, okay, so you guys can see it. We know right off the bat that the square root of -1 is I, okay? So if it's an I by itself, that's an imaginary number, okay? If it's an I by itself, that's an imaginary number, okay? And it doesn't exist, except for in mathematics and crazy things that happen in electricity, okay? But if we start adding numbers to it, then we get a real number, like a real number, right? Plus an imaginary. That's what we call a complex number. So a complex number is a real plus an imaginary. Because you're taking something that's real, like the number 5, that's real. Number 10, that's a real number. 1/2. Any number that's a real number, and then you add it to an imaginary, they don't go together. One doesn't exist, it's imaginary, and the other is real. But we will do that. We'll put them together. And if you put them together, that's called a complex number. It's kind of a complicated situation here. You got somebody who's real, kind of like, relationships. You got this boyfriend, he's not real, right? So it's pretty complex, right? Girls, that situation, huh? Yeah. Right. Or boys, you know this girl, she's really fakey phony, she's not real, right? So it's complex, right? Yeah. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, show your parents this film, huh? Yeah, you know what we're talking about, don't you? Okay, so let's look at example 1, okay? So here's what we have. We have a complex number is not any number, a plus bi, and imaginary numbers are just I numbers, okay? So example 1, we're going to simplify this, but I'm going to do it the long way so you can see. I'm going to go and take it as, rewrite the square root of 9 times square root of -1, okay? And you'll probably start skipping this step, but I'm going to show it as the teacher just because I like to show every step, okay? It helps you. 9 times -1 is -9. You guys agree with that? And the square root of 9 is 3, and the square root of -1 is I. Okay? And that's all we do. Okay? Square root of 9 is 3, and the square root of -1 is I. Okay, so we need to make sure we have these two things circled. I already circled it for you, but up there, okay? Because we're going to use those two quite a bit. Okay, same thing on example 2, except for example 2, we're going to have to reduce the root first. I know that I can write this as the square root of 4, the square root of 3, and the square root of -1, right? And I'm looking for, yeah, Tammy?
So is it negative? It has to be, okay.
It has to be an I, right? And we're going to get there on this problem. You're totally right. So I'm going to reduce 12, 4 times 3. And I like 4 because the square root of 4 is 2. So I'm going to get a 2. I'm going to get a square root of 3. And I put the I. Now make sure, if you can, that the I is outside of the square root. Does that make sense? It's outside. And some books write it this way. Some books will write it this way. They're both correct. I frequently will write it in the second form. I like the I in the back. Some books write it here so that it doesn't look like it's inside the square root. They're both the same answer, okay? How's that? Okay, example 3. Same type of stuff. Same manipulation. The 3 is just a regular 3. Just write it down. Just write it down. But then I'm going to go square root of 4, square root of 5, square root of -1. I know the square root of 4 is 2. There is no square root of 5. And the square root of -1 is I. Just made that into an I. So I'll have a 6I square root of 5. How's that?
So confused. I'm already confused.
You're already confused? I don't want you to be confused. So I'll back you up, okay? Okay, now, the 3, I'll back you up. Yeah, the 3 is just a regular 3, so I just wrote it down on the outside. And then I'm thinking with 20, it's a square root. I can break 20. And the numbers I like to use, remember the perfect numbers, the perfect square numbers I like?
3 there. I thought it was just example 3.
Oh, no.
Oh my god.
Tammy, does that help? You're with me now? Good. It's early, it's Monday, right? Okay, example 4. Square root, right? How many answers? 2. So we're going to say this is x equals plus or minus the square root of a negative 81, right? 2 answers, right? Plus or minus. I'm going to show every step because that's what I do, and if you've already got the answer, great. I'm going to go plus or minus the square root of 81 times the square root of negative 1. Okay, I want to get the I. I mean, you can see the square root of negative 1 here. There's my I. So 2 answers, plus or minus 9, and the square root of negative 1 is I. So you do get 2 answers. You get a 9I and a negative 9I. Pretty easy, isn't it?
Wait, how did you get the 9?
Square root of 81.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
Okay, example 5. We're going to have, you ready? 3 answers. Okay, so 3 answers. The first thing I'm going to do is common factor out a 3x. So we're going to have a 3x, and I'll have an x squared plus 25 equals 0, okay? So when I factor, quite often then I make my mini equations. Remember, I factor, make my mini equations. One mini equation is 3x equals 0, and then my other mini equation would be an x squared plus 25 equals 0, okay? Now again, I'm going to find 3 answers. I should find 3 answers because of the x cubed. I know there's going to be 3 answers because of the x cubed. First answer, divide by 3, that's easy. X equals 0, right? Second equation, well, it won't factor, but I can go minus 25. I'm just going to solve, right? Minus 25 to solve, right? X squared equals negative 25, right? Am I going too fast? Okay. Square root, but I know I have to have 2 answers, right? I've got to have 2 answers because of the x squared. So x is going to equal plus or minus the square root of negative 25. I'm going to get an I. You guys agree? Get an I. I'm going to get an I, so I'm going to get plus or minus 5I. Okay, I skipped a step, but you're okay if I skip a step. Square root of negative gives me the I. Right, square root of negative gives me the I. Okay with that?
Yep. And those 3 answers come.
Yeah, I've got 1 plus 5I minus 5I. Great question, Katie. Okay, Tammy, give me a thumbs up when you're ready, okay? There you go. All right, on the back side, here we go. Example 6. So let's solve example 6 like we've done in the past. I'm going to go minus 4, right? So I'll have a parentheses x minus 3 squared equals negative 4, right? Okay. Morelli, how am I doing? Good. You can't see? Now you tell me. All right. You could scoot closer. Okay. Square root. How many answers? 2. So I'm going to have an x minus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of negative 4, right? Or x minus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 4 times the square root of negative 1. I'm going to get my I. I'm going to get my I in this because I took the square root of a negative number. So anytime you take the square root of a negative number, we're going to definitely get an I answer. X minus 3 equals plus or minus 2I. There are 2 answers there. Okay, the 2I, I've got the square root of 4 is 2, and I have the square root of negative 1 is I. So the square root of 4 is 2, square root of negative 1 is I, and then I'm just going to add 3. So go plus 3, plus 3. You cannot add those. One is a real number, the other is imaginary. So we just rewrite as 3 plus or minus 2i. Cannot add those. That's a real number, 3, and that's an imaginary number, 2i, okay? So you leave it as 3 plus or minus 2i, okay? All right, example 7. Am I going too fast? Am I okay? Good. Okay, so it says by completing the square, right? So let's go through what we always do. So step 1, bring c to the other side, right? X squared minus 10x equals negative 35, right? Half of 10 is 5. 5 squared is 25. So I'm going to add 25. I'm going to add 25, okay? So then I'm going to factor this into an x minus 5. X minus 5 equals negative 10, right? X minus 5 quantity squared equals negative 10. And then square root, but I need 2 answers, right? Square root, I need 2 answers. So I'll have a x minus 5 equals plus or minus the square root of negative 10, okay? I'm going to deal with this next, okay? So I'll have an x minus 5 equals plus or minus the square root of 10 times the square root of negative 1. That way I can get my I, right? If I pull that out as 10 times negative 1, there's my I. So I'm going to have an x minus 5 equals plus or minus the square root of 10 I. Okay? And then let's just add the 5. Now when you add the 5, you really can't add them. When you add the 5, you go plus 5. You really can't add them because this is a real number, 5, and this is an imaginary, so we just keep them separate. We're going to say the answer then is x equals 5 plus or minus the square root of 10 I. Okay? So, we've got lots and lots of time, right? I tried to do that. Page 353. Okay? Lots of time. So let's get it done in class, and then